Baruchim Aboim B'Shem Hashem B'Shem Irgin Shir. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov of Smith Shlita and Dina Schiris Batim, apartment rental questions. Today's shir is dedicated to Nishmas Reb Shmuel Ben Ruvain Wolf, father of the board members of Irgin Shir, Ruvain Wolf and Moshe Wolf. And Shmuel Tzur B'Tzar Chaim. I'd like to give a big shekach to Reb Simcha Cohen, partially sponsoring today's shir, Lilin Shmas Oviv, Reb Yitzchak Ben Bishwel HaKohen, Shalom Yotzayut Shvat, and Shmas Tzur B'Tzar Chaim, to have the great schus of sponsoring a shir called Irgin Shir, 718-851-8651, or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Harav Smith.
Baruch Hashem, today our neighborhoods are bursting at the seams, and Baruch Hashem, there are many people moving in, and there, as we know, is a pretty severe shortage of either rentals or homes to be bought. And we hear a number of shilas, sometimes a little upsetting, how the people are a little too aggressive to get the apartment, to get a house. Someone just told me there was a house that they put up for sale, and there was over 50 bidders. And of course the price goes up, and the money, and it only goes to the guy that's selling. But the point really we have to try to discuss today is that when is there a problem as far as taking someone else's home that he wants to buy, or a rental, and other such shilas. And I must say, even if you're not into real estate, and you're not selling, you're not buying, you're not renting, you have a one-family house, this is really one of the big sugyas in Chai Shemish, but actually it's two of the big sugyas that's negeya other areas as well. It could be negeya taking someone else's parking spot, taking someone else's chavrusa. I heard a shayla, someone asked, he was like, ois mensch, someone stole his wife's cleaning lady. You know, that's like a evash and a shamba tluyaba. So basically it's a big sugya in Chai Shemish, but specifically it's the sugya of taking someone else's thing which might be theirs. And the emphasis is that really, when it makes sense, before someone does business, he should learn Chai Shemish, but just like someone can't be a shaykhet if he doesn't know Yehudeya. A person can't do business if he doesn't know Chai Shemish. But until that happens, we'll have to learn sugya after sugya. So let's start with a very simple question. Someone saw an apartment and he liked it. He didn't make a kinyan yet. What's wrong if I need an apartment, if I go and before any deal was made and I offer the landlord a little more money? In other words, if he signed the lease, if he made a kinyan, so a kinyan is a fully binding, don't forget. Now we'll soon see that really a lease technically is not a kinyan, unless you structure it differently, but basically a lease is a contractual agreement to make a kinyan. But lamaisa, if there was a kinyan, of course, then you can't renege on your commitment of whether that's wrong. Even if there was not a kinyan, but if the landlord gave a word, so by Yidden in Yiddish, a vart is a vart. Even in English, a word is a word. And we'll soon see how much meaning goes into those simple words, a vart is a vart. But we see how Chazal really wanted us to honor every commitment. The famous Gemara in Makis of Chavdala v'doiver emes bulvavoy. So the Gemara tells the story of Safra, how to say that an item that he was trying to sell. Someone came to him, and it seemed like it was a guy because Safra was saying Krishma, and this person offered him a price for the purchase. So of course, if Safra was saying Krishma, ignored him. And then the other fellow who wanted to buy it hiked the price. I'll give you double, whatever it is. So after Safra finished davening, he said, listen, you offered a first price. At that moment, I thought I'll take it, but I can't because I'm both davening saying Krishma. And I'm going to keep the first offer that you gave me. Even though you offered honestly a second offer, but v'doiver emes b'lvavoi. Not only if he gave a word, but even a thought. Even our thoughts have to be emes. Now, although this is not halacha l'maisa chiyuv, but the Rav and Mechira Aleph, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and Samach Beis Tez Zayin, both write that Yiras Shamayim should even keep his machshavas liboy. No? Okay, that's Midas Chasidus. But avart is avart. But the emes is, we see a different halacha. It's actually a Mishnah in Bav Metzia Samach Memtes, and it's quoted in Chai Shemish B'Reish Daled Aleph. And that is that if someone made a kinyan, He gave money to buy an item. Now, I don't want to get into the details now, but really, midaraisa, mois, kainos, and if he paid for the item, it's a kinyan. But Chazal said the kinyan should not yet take place, whatever the reason is. So he'd made a maisa kinyan, but it wasn't yet chal. And then he wants to back out because he has a good taina. The kinyan wasn't chal. So the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch paskins that's an avla. V'chayiv l'kabel mishapar. Now, mishapar, it sounds pretty holy, like like a para aduma, but mishapar is frightening, nothing less than frightening. The Shulchan Aruch and Siv Dalid says if someone went through this commitment, even though there was no real kinyan, Oirin Oisi, they Bezdin curses him. And they say, Mishapar mi anshe dar hamabel, anshe dar afloga, whoever punished these, the worst societies, Stoim v'amoira, and Mitzrayim, Yifra misha eini oime b'diburai. Bezdin gives him this whopping klala of the first 4 worst societies in history. But as if this is not bad enough, the Ramah says, no, the Mechaber didn't say it right. Not Yifra misha eini oimid. Yifra mimcha im eincha oimid b'diburai. He comes to the Bezdin. Bezdin's talking third person about, Yenim. He's not from the Yenimites. No. We mean you. It's Pliya de Gazach. One day he's a Sheni Yid, and now he's getting cursed like the worst societies in history. In fact, the Ramah says, Oimim loy berabim this. A Yid's vart has to be a vart. But there's a different level, which is really more negay to our sugya today. And that is, even if there's no kinyan at all, a mere oral agreement, the fact that they both agreed, the tenant and landlord agreed to this price, so it says the Mechaber and Siv Dalet, based on the same sugya above Metzia, once there was a commitment, so the Shulchan Aruch, if someone wants to back out, even though halachically he's allowed to back out because there was no kinyan, it was just a verbal agreement. Hareza mi mechusre amana. This is lacking trustworthy. He's not trustworthy. He's lacking emonis. Now, there's no kinyan, that's true, but you gave a word. Both parties gave a word. What is this? What is the source of this? Again, if there's no kinyan, why can you make such a frightening halacha? So the Mukhi Yosef and the Mordechai point to a pasuk in Sefanya, She'eres Yisrael lo yasu avla v'lo yidabru chazav. In other words, you're right. You're not reneging on a kinyan. There was no kinyan, but you gave a word, and that's an avla. And by Eden, that's not keeping a word is a avla. Now, some feel really based on the Gemara that it's a pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, Moiznei Tzedek, and even hin tzedek yilachem. So the more darshans hin, your hain has to be a hain. Your yes has to be a yes, and a no is a no. Now the emphasis, you look in the Minchas Pitim in the beginning of Siman Reish Dalid, he says it's a shaila if this is an Issa D'Oraisa or not. If it's a pasuk in Safanya, so as the Aruch HaShulchan points out, it's Divrei Kabbalah, which is more than a D'Rabbanan. But if it's based on a pasuk in Gedoshim, so then a person that doesn't keep his commitment, although there was no kinyan, is Oyvan Issa D'Oraisa. And that's why it's a plea. The Chasam Sofer says, if you have a Safik Mechusrei Amana, you can be Mekel. So I saw the Mechas Pitim it's not so Pashit. If you hold as an Issa D'Oraisa of Hin Tzedek, then it's Safik D'Oraisa. But no doubt about it, we have 2 categories that we have to be wary of. If there was a kinyan made, even if it wasn't kaina, then there's a frightening mishapar, Rahman al-Atzlan. But in our case, usually there's no kinyanim on an apartment. But there's the concept of mechusrei amana. You gave a word, you have to keep the word. But Rabbi say, our shaila today, there was none of the above. The tenant saw the apartment, the landlord said, okay, we'll talk about it. Why can I chap him ois? And more so, I'm a lamdin, I'll say chayecha koidman. He needs an apartment, I need an apartment, a critical shortage of apartments, and I'm not stealing, I'm paying. In fact, I'm even offering the landlord more money. The landlord's happy and I'm happy, so if he's not happy, chayecha koidman. So here we come to a different Gemara, and it's actually a scandal in the Gemara in Kedushin and Test, but it's very, very important for our sugya today. Says the Gemara, and this is Kedushin and Test, Rav Gido, having mahapach bahi ara. It's an interesting word. Mahapach usually means he's tossing it over. But Mahapach in this context means he's trying to get something. Rav Gidl was looking into buying a land, real estate. Rav Abba, and as the Gemara later explains, was unaware of Rav Gidl's involvement, and he bought the land. He just went straight to the Moicha and bought the land. Rav Gidl went to complain to Rav Zera, who went to Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak was a Rebbe of Rav Abba, and he says, your Talmud preempted someone's purchase, a big Ava. So Rabbi Yitzchak was a little shocked. He goes, okay, wait, he'll come to me to Oile Regel, I'll take care of it. So when he came to on Yom Tov, he came to his Rebbe Rabbi Yitzchak. So Rabbi Yitzchak asked Rav Abba, Ani mahapech b'charara, a poor person is tossing a cake. That's a Rashi insight that the Flamirei says, charara is a cake. But B'kitz, an Ani is tossing a cake, obviously trying to be kainit, and someone else comes along and chaps it, what would you say? So Rav Abba says, what? Ani mahapech b'charara is a Rasha. And he didn't know he paskin his own fate. So he goes, so why'd you do it? He goes, do what? And the whole story, he said, well, I didn't know. I Pasha didn't know someone was there first. So we see that basically, Ani Mapech B'charara Nikra Rasha. Now Rasha, as in, Hamana Rasha. You're allowed to, we'll soon see worse, you're allowed to, but Bezdin calls him a Rasha. Now the only heta that Rav Abba had, he Pasha didn't know. In fact, the Gemara says if he didn't know, so give it back, but the Gemara said it wasn't going to work out, he wouldn't take it back. But one thing is very frightening. Even though there was no formal kinyan, and there wasn't even a formal agreement, l'chayra. But when someone is seeing something first, give him his space, give him a chance. If he doesn't want to take it, then you could move in and take it. And this is in Chayshim Mishpat, a little later, not in Reish Dal, but Reish Lamed Zayin. Hamachze achadav l'knoisei or l'soichrei, whether it's karkum betaltalim, if someone preempts him and chaps it, nikra rasha. Zok tisma, machrizin olav bebeis hakneses, that he did a ma'aser resha. In other words, maybe till today he was a shein eid, like they say a story. The Gabbai asked this fellow, what are you, a kohen or a levi? He goes, no, I'm a shlishi. See, some people, they're shlishi. Well, that was yesterday. Today, he became a rasha. Bezdin, in shul, there will be machris, he's a rasha. The Marsham in his Mishpat Shalom, in the end of Simon Reish Dalid, says it could even be makinois, I should take nafshe to stop him from doing this. The Marsham, Mishpat Shalom, by Yosef Reish Lam Bezai in Aleph, he says a Rasha, this is a Rasha that's possible for Eidis and for Shvua. What's the pshat? Because someone else saw it first, and there's a certain amount of yash that every Yid has to have. The Marit, famous Marit and Kedusha, and now on this Gemara, he quotes from an earlier source that this is, the Avla is based on a Gemara, the Gemara in Sanhedrin Pei Aleph, Darshan as Eishes Re'eu Loi Timei, Shleyered L'Umdas Chaveiroi. A person, the worst thing is a person that chaps someone else's umnas. So you look at the Gemara there, the Gemara quotes the pasuk a little later in the Cheskel, Tzidkas Atzadik Olav Tia, the Rishas Haresha Olav Tia. When someone chaps someone else's thing, Rishas Harasha Olav Tia. The Chesma in a beautiful, very Yisayratik Tshuva in Chayshim Mishpat, Siman Ayin Tes, very Barich Zol Sugya, he writes on this Marit, Diver Pi Chacham Chein. That means this person, this chapa, is not just a chapa. Rishas Olav Tia. Rishas Harasha Olav Tia. It's not just unethical, but a person is living with rishis. And avada, that's the concept of Anim Hapech B'charor. The Mordechai in Kedushin Tavkov Chav Dalid says there's a different source for this, and that is the pasuk in Vayeschanan, Vasisa Yosha Toy Be'enei Hashem. And once you mention that, it should give us a different sensitivity, because don't forget, the pasuk in Parshas Vayeschanan, the Torah Kedusha requires us Shamar Tishmeron Es Mitzvahs Hashem Eidoisav Chukav Ashatziva, which basically we have to keep Kol Torah Kula. The next pasuk, Vasisa Yoshva Toy Be'enei Hashem. Now, Frek the Ramban, what's that adding? You already said mitzvahs, Eidav, and Chukav. What else could it be? But more so, Frek the Ramban, after the Torah says you have to Yoshev HaToiv, L'man yitavlach uvasa v'rosh tesa'aretz ha'toiv asher nishbal ha'veisecha. What's the special schar for Yoshev HaToiv? And what does Yoshev HaToiv mean? What is more than the Torah's mitzvahs? Zok the Ramban, there's an aftacha. If something which might not be a mitzvah, might not be in Shulchan Aruch, it might not be a chiyuv, but if it's lacking yashrus, and a person is moise nefesh for yashrus, he gets the special schar l'man yitavlach uvos v'rosh tesa'aretz. And the Ramban says words that we couldn't say. Ki hu der banish leim oyev hatoiv hayosha. The Bereshit has kaviyachol 1,000 times a special soft spot in his heart for someone that's moise nefesh for yashrus. It might not be in Shulchan Aruch, but whose status of the banish leim's heart status? Ki hu oyev hatoiv hayosha. And then the Ramban says, which we all have to hear, because the Torah can't say everything. Torah can't say how to park, and not to honk and make noise, and not to be an aggressive driver, and not to be a mean landlord, etc., etc. But the Torah gave a umbrella obligation. Vasisa Yoshev HaToiv. Vu status of the Bereshit's heart status. In other words, it's not just important to be glat kosher, we have to be glat yosha. And for that, there's a special schar of l'man yitavlach uvos v'rosh tesa'aretz. Also, unfortunately, the flip side, by a lack of yashrus, a person goes from tzidkis to rishus. He becomes rachmano litzlan v'rosh alav tiyeh. So here we see a little bit of an introduction to the concept of not only when they're kinyanim, but simply even a honey mapich b'hara nikra rosh. Now the big question, of course, is when does it apply? After kinyan was made, it's possible you can't do that. So in Svara, the concept of honey mapich b'hara applies when the landlord and the tenant, or the buyer and the seller, came to an oral agreement. They decided, okay, it's going to be this amount per month. You must come out. Okay, we'll write up a contract tomorrow. In other words, when they wrote up a contract, if it was a legal kinyan, so that's a vada pashut, you can't renege. But in the interim, once the agreement was made, although legally and halachically it's not binding, there was no kinyan, a word, but this is a word as a word. The Mordechai in Bava Basra, Tafkuf Nun Aleph, explains, why can't we say even before the actual agreement, this should also be a Ani Mapach Harara? Let's say he just threw out a price. Maybe give him his face. Zok the Mordechai, a Tyre Yisoid. Because the Torah HaKadosh, Chazal protected both rights. You're worrying about the tenant, that's nice. What about the landlord? If he has to stay and wait for this fellow to make up his mind, otherwise it's a mishapar, on a different tenant, you're not protecting the rights of the Meicha. Someone will give a ridiculous price. Let me think about it. Okay, you can't go to anybody else because I'm here first. And there has to be protection of both rights. And that's why I guess the Ramah in Reish Lamed Zayin Aleph quotes this Mordechai, that when does Ani Mahapech B'Charara begin? If there was a real agreement on both sides, albeit an agreement, but that's when it begins. However, the Prisha in Sifkat Aleph and our Simon, he quotes the Mordechai. I don't think he's arguing, but he says that now the minig is that even though there wasn't a formal agreement, official agreement, but as he says it, but when it looks good, and if a new tenant doesn't intervene, it will work out, then there's also an Issa Chomer of Ani Mapich B'Charara. Now, you have to understand, when a tenant sees the apartment, so he likes it, but he has to think about it and has to work it out, because he's living in this house and this child sleeps here and here. How am I going to do it? So he wants to think it over at night just to see if it's going to work. But the next day he'll grab it. And this is something that experience shows. So the Prisha seems to say, even if there wasn't a formal agreement, but if you leave it take its course, it will happen. Even that is a problem on another tenant of Issa Onim Hapach Becharar. Zokter Chashulchan and Siv Beis, on the words of this Prisha, Minig Yafahu Medina V'roi Lebracha. the Marsham and Mishpat Shalom and Ramesh and Chelik Aleph, Sim and Samach also accept this as the minig. In other words, be patient, give him a chance. Now, of course, let me tell you that the second tenant is not losing if he doesn't get this apartment, because don't forget, part of our Amuna, not only Bas Pliny or Pliny, but bias Pliny or Pliny. So your bias, your apartment is by shared. Even if there's a shortage, the Baruch has no shortages, trust me, it's going to work out for your best. So Lamaisa, we definitely should try to follow this minig yafa and give space when it's needed. Now, Avada, very often, they're playing around. Both are insisting, I'm not budging. The tenant says, no, I'm not paying $1 more than this. Land says, I'm not giving you any less than this. So if no one's maskim, so then you can come along and try to work things out. Even if one side is maskim, but that's not askama. It's like, fellows who couldn't find the shidduch, he said, Baruch Hashem, I'm doing great lately. Go, what happened? Well, at least I'm maskim to get married. So 50% we have. That's garnish with nish, right? Now, sometimes also, they're close to an agreement. They're just playing around. You have to know, try to figure out, they say Rabbi Yashiv once was asked about when a shidduch, not a gabi tenant, but a shidduch, if they say no, you shouldn't push. But he says, yeah, that's true. If they say no, then leave it. But if they say no, but what they really mean is more money, then you could push, because you're not pushing. They want you to push and give more money. Now, sometimes the landlord or tenant says no, but they mean just, let's work it out. So basically, we're going to say, if it's close to a agreement, then leave it. If they're both or one of them are saying absolutely not, then you could assume that it's no, and you could move in. Question, if Lamaisa, there was a situation that they basically agreed, whether it's actually verbally agreed or close to it, and a second tenant came along, and he either didn't know or didn't care, and he did an avlan, and he got the landlord to agree to his proposal. So first of all, the landlord has to know who's over on lifnei iva, because he enabled the second tenant, to do an issa of mahapech haror. But it's more than that. And by the way, the Makna and Kedushin and Test spells that out. Even though on the landlord, if he didn't make a real agreement, there's no issa on him, but him allowing the second tenant to chop the apartment, that's lifnei iva. He's enabling the second tenant to be over on mahapech haror. But more than that, Lamaisa, the Paiskim say, again, I saw this, the Pischei Tshuva and Sivkot and Beis and the Aruch HaShulchan and Siv Beis Midas Chasidus al Kaponim, even if the second tenant got an agreement from the landlord, he should give it up, because you got this apartment through an Ani B'Apech M'Charor Nikar Russia. Now I don't know ainly Asik ben Historis, but if someone's living in a house or an apartment that he got through becoming a Russia, that's not a very conducive place to bring up a family. Have a family of tzaddikim in a place that he became a Russia doesn't seem to be the right thing. So basically, this is clear. But the chiddush is that let's say he bought the item, and he started using it already. So you say fafalim. But I saw, and this is Pashat, the Marsham points this out, that a rental before he moved in is like chatchila. Yeah, you got an agreement, fine, but give it back. Because if he bought something and started using it, so it's ready, but can keep it. A rental, even after you close with the landlord, but you didn't move in yet. So for you, it's a chatchila. Drop it like stolen merchandise and let him go back to the first person. Interesting question. The Gemara is talking. The Chiddush of Anu Abchara is talking about buying a real estate. Who said it's talking about a rental? So the answer is Ibayis Mikra, Ibayis Svar. First of all, Svara is Yashris. It's all about being an Ish Yasha. So what's the chilik, buying or rental? More so, I guess Ibayis Mikra, Taisvis, we'll soon see on this Gemara of Anu Abchara, which is talking about buying, discusses taking someone else's worker. In other words, you see someone has a good worker, a good malamed, a good manayel, a good head counselor. We once discussed this barichas, but Tais discusses taking someone else's worker is also animapech harara, unless it's a very rare opportunity, and that we discussed a different time. But no doubt about it, That's why when you look in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch by us, it says whether it's buying or rental, there's an issa on Mahapech Harara. Why? Because zil basa taima. So taka, taking someone else's cleaning lady, unless there's a special heta, would be including the issa on Mahapech Harara. Even though you didn't steal someone, you're not a gain of the fashes, but if they have a worker, Taisa says, unless there's a heta, by Malam, there's a heta because he could do a better job. So you have to know if a lahavdil, if a cleaning lady is like a Malamid, that mine is one of a kind. So we'll leave that to your discretion. But no doubt about it, it's lav dafka buying, it's also rental. And that's the Shulchan Aruch. What's interesting is, let's say there's a mitzia on the floor. Let's say there's a wallet, a makom sheroiv akum, you're allowed to keep it, and someone is about to take it, but you're quicker than him, and you grabbed it first. Does the issa of Mahapech Harara apply in that case? Well, this gives us a little pause, because till now we spoke about a rental or a purchase, real estate or a rental, maybe mitzia, maybe aveda, first come, first serve. However, in Svara, we're back to zil basa taima. Where's the yashris? He saw it first, he's about to take it, leave it. More so, if you look at Rashi in our Gemara, Kedushin Nuntes, Oni Mahapech Harara, Rashi teaches Machza Acharel Liskais Bo Min Hefka. Rashi is teaching the Mahapech Harara Sugi is talking about a mitzia and kolshkein, a purchase or a rental. So according to Rashi, chapping someone else's mitzia, someone else saw it first, not his yet, is the same avla. However, Rabbeinu Tam, this is another machlokes Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says it can't be like Rashi, because of the Gemara above mitzia daf yud. If someone saw a mitzia and someone else chapped it first, the second one's allowed to take it. So for Rabbeinu Tam, it must be that it comes to mitzia, zok Rabbeinu Tam, there's no is Mahapech Harara, and he says a svar. When it comes to a purchase or a rental, so he has it first, yashtris, let him take it. Go, you'll find a different apartment. Don't worry, there's enough bayis pliny to pliny. You can find it elsewhere. But you can't look and find mitzias. So I saw the Ramban in Bava Basra, the Daladam at Beis, and the mamish a half a line, less than half a line. Chayav Koidman. The Ramban is explaining Rabbeinu Tam's shita by mitzia because chayecha koidman. In other words, if you could get it elsewhere, well, you have to be matriach more, so fine, be matriach. That's what Yiddishkeit's about, making tirchas. He has it first, he saw it first, leave it. But if it's a question, this or nothing, then chayecha koidman. And taka the Kesef HaKadoshim, the Buchacha, a little more mayrich, but that's the yisoid of Rabbeinu Tam. Rashi apparently held, yashvis koidim. He saw it first, let him have it. How do we paskin? We'll soon see many nafkaminas. So in our Simon Reish Lamed Zayin Aleph, the Shulchan Aruch brings both days, both as yesh oimrims, which is very vague. What does he hold? If he says a shita and then yesh oimrim, he goes with the first shita. But here it's two yesh oimrims. The Ramah, Svara, Rishoyin, and Nira'ika. The Ramah seems to say the halacha is like the first shita, which is Rabbeinu Tam, that by mitzia or aveda there is no mahapech b'charor. Now, granted, he does add certain clauses. The Rav in Hefka, Ois Zayin, and Igros Moshe, Evan Ezra, Simon Tzadik Aleph, interesting, a shayla of mahapech b'charor regarding shidduchim. Someone chapped someone else's shidduch, which is a different share. But the Moshe, like the Rav, says it's kedai to be machmir, like the Shitas Rashi, that even by a mitzia and aveda, we do say mahapech b'charor. And I think Suffolk Russia is also bad enough, being a Suffolk Rush according to Rashi. Now, I don't want to compare, but Rashi, many times, tefillin, we try to keep both, So maybe here, we should also try to keep Rashi Shita. But now that we have the basic Yisayid, let's try to apply it more specifically. Ma'isa Shahaya, someone needed an apartment. He saw there was an advertisement apartment for rent, and he's walking in, and someone's walking out. Obviously, the other person saw the apartment. So he decides, let me try my luck. And he offered the landlord, what do you want? I'm going to give you $50 more per month. He didn't ask questions. But Lamaisa, the first person, was close to a contract. So this is a simple case where it's a Russia. And even though there was no formal kinyan, but as we said, the Paiskim go with this minig. Once he's about to take it, don't take someone else's thing. The landlord, took my offer, and there was no commitment from the first one, so the land was over lefneiva. So this is basically, even b'di'evet, like we said, give it back, find a different apartment. If it wasn't imminent, it was just handling, and they both left like, not close, then you could definitely do what you can. Then chayecha koydem, because you take it first. It might be a good idea before you take such an apartment to ask the landlord, where you're holding. You holding next to, close to commitment. And I'm not saying you're mechuyev to, but definitely someone that's living yashris would do that. Lamaisa a shver shaila, but it's common when there are situations that there's pashut, no apartments to be had. There's a critical shortage of apartments, and our neighborhood, Lakewood, Baruch Hashem, the neighbors are booming. There's pashut, very little apartments. So here, the Lamdan will say, this apartment for me is a metzia, because you can't get anyone, but this works for me perfectly, the rent is good. You're Russia, not really, but metzia, we have at least Rabbeinu Tam Shita, and their mom Yikidadin, I have what to be saying mechan. So Lamaisa, we could argue, who said you could extend that? We call in our terms, it's a metzia. Apartment is not a metzia, paying top dollar for it. Maybe the Rabbeinu Tam's kula is a metzia, an aveda, not a bargain. You say you bought a $1 million house, I got a metzia. A pretty interesting metzia. But maybe the whole heter Rabbeinu Tam is a metzia, literally not a bargain. And indeed, the Ramah says that. When the Ramah that paskins like the Rabbeinu Tam, that metzia is mutter, that's literally a metzia, but when you're buying something, there's no heter. That is according to the Ramah. Obviously, the whole heter has another problem. Even if you hold that metzia includes rentals, but according to Rashi, there's no heter metzia. And Ramesh and the Rav say you should be on a Rashi. So it's obviously far from pashut. But there's another tzad, and that's the Ramban that I mentioned earlier. There's Shach and Sif and Gimel quotes the Ramban, that Lamaisa, they made a light plug. You can't say, this metzia, this sale is mamish, such a bargain, I'm not a chapper, it's a metzia. They made metzias mutter, and a case where you're buying or renting, that is us. It's really very hard to know what's something considered metzia. And you could look, you could wait, you'll find an apartment. And I saw both the Marshal and Simon Lamed Vav, Chum Zades and Simon Shin Mem, they both use the same svara. Who could really classify when a rental or a purchase is a real metzia? Have patience, you'll find another apartment, you'll find another house. So the Chum Zades use the lashon like Chilku Chachamim. Marshal says, who knows when is it really a metzia? But at the end of the day, we do find that some are mekel. If you could say that Lamaisa, this is a real aved, a real metzia, then you could be mekel. The Avineza in Chayshemish, but Simon Yudzayin says Vada, you could be mekel if b'shas atchak, but you have to be very, very sure that it's really taka a metzia. Don't forget, to hold that is only Rabbeinu Tam versus Rashi, and according to the Shach, we saw the Ramban, you're not allowed to do that. So it's only a heta boror if it's a metzia boror that you can't find elsewhere. The Pischei Choshen in Geneva, Perek Tes, the end of Har Lamed Vav, says Tzarchi and Lamaisa, and don't forget, even according to Rashi, there's no heta whatsoever. Best advice, if you have such a shaila, ask a shaila. A person has a lot of negiyas, even a tzaddik and a chassid is blinded by negiyas, like the pasuk will learn soon in Paras Mishpatim says, if you have someone else had the apartment first, you might think it's mamish crucial and critical. No, if a Rav will say this is a metzia situation, yes shall be lismach. Question, you want a certain apartment, but it's under a lease. But the lease expires, March 1st. So you go over to the landlord and you say, you know what, I know the lease expires March 1st, I want to take over the apartment. You're not meshuvah to him because it's all over March 1st. So, al pi seichel, this is wrong for two reasons. First of all, the person that's living there has a right to renew the lease. Now, besides the fact that it's like they're holding close, just like a stranger is holding close with the land, you can't chap. Here, he's living there for 2 years. The only reason they made a lease is because he wanted to raise the rent a little bit. So, avada, he's close. You have to wait till he gives his opinion. Maybe he wants to keep the apartment. Also, this already I saw the Divrei Go'ainim and Chav Zayin Yud Beis says. The Pischei Choshen and Schiris, Perik Dal or Yud Ches has another point. The Torah in Basis Yashav HaToiv, one of the examples that Chazal learned Yashav HaToiv is a bar metzra. To make a very long story short, he's selling a house. There are 2 buyers. One lives in Florida, but he wants to buy an investment. And one lives next door, wants to take over the lot and build a bigger house. No, bar metzra goes first. Yashris, Seichel. Ein lecha bar metzra, like a person living in the apartment. He paid moving costs. He renovated. He made it to his liking. So you're going to evict him and preempt him because you got there a day, an hour first. It's totally illogical. So no doubt about it, that would be a perfect example of our sugya, yashris, from 2 different angles. Now, if the landlord or tenant don't want to resume continue the contract, so then you can chap it gesundheit. Consider the following situation that's really quite challenging as it proceeds. Let's say the landlord and tenant are discussing about this apartment. The landlord says, you know what, I'm not interested. I'm going to go elsewhere. I'm going to take a different tenant. Avada, the landlord's allowed to do that, right? It's up to him. It's his apartment, right? Who is limited to mahapech b'charara? A second tenant versus the first tenant. Now, if the landlord agreed to rent it to Pliny, so for him to renege on his contract, chas v'shalom, is מחוסר אמנה. Terrible. But there was no contract. It was close. So it's a funny situation. A different tenant can't come along and offer more because that's מחוסר אמנה. Because that's b'charara. They're close. But the landlord didn't give a commitment. He didn't give a word. He could go elsewhere. Fine. And that's the chayr pashit. Certainly, like the Ramah, without a kinyan, there's nothing to talk about that. Now, a new tenant wants to come along and offer more money for the same apartment. So then the landlord will say, oh, I like you better. Is that right? In other words, the landlord's allowed to take someone else. Can a second tenant make an offer, and therefore the landlord will want him first? So you look in the Erech Shai and Sif Cotton Bays regarding a kehila, he seems to be makel when they're offering more, but it's a pliya to accept this on halacha l'maisa, because first of all, the Beis Yosef already says it's asa, and pashtus it's asa, because basically the landlord has a right to take any tenant he wants, but you as a second tenant can't preempt the first one by offering more. But for you, that would be ani mahapech b'charara. Oh, but here's the kasha. So, frek the Marshag in Chele Gimel Kuf Yud Zayin, a mordika kasha. When I'm selling a house and I have 2 buyers, one's a bar metzra, but the other fellow's offering more, I could go to the other fellow because I have to go for my interest. He's into my interest. So, frek the Marshag, why can't a second tenant that wants the apartment after there was agreement or close, why can he offer more money? And then al toiva samoicha, he's allowed to take it. So the Marshag, you're making a big mistake. If they were holding close or they already agreed, then for him, for the moicha, that's enough money. You want to offer more money? More money is not a hefsid. More money is meniyas revach. If the landlord was willing to rent at this price, so he's happy. The fact more money, I think this is a murdik yisoid. We didn't come down to this world to make more money. We came down to this world to make a living. People say I have to work in chalamoid because I can make more money. I'm making per day. But Chazal say that's meniyas revach. Right? If he doesn't go to learn, he can make more money. But there's a difference between making a living and making extra money. And the Mashag, with his very penetrating insight, understood. Once the Moicha was willing to rent it to first tenant for this price, that means it's worth it for him. The second tenant's offering more money. That's already a meniyas revach. And that doesn't justify the second tenant coming along and grabbing what really belongs to the first one. And this is a big insight in this sugya. And I want to make a point. I never like to learn lessons from Goyim, but this was a very striking lesson that I learned when I saw my house. It was almost 30 years ago. It was back when Kennedy was come out mostly Goyish, so my wife gave me a address, go to this house. I was the first one that saw the house. The guy put it mamish like yesterday. It was very bashert. And I just looked at it. I had no idea what I'm looking, but I'm looking at it, my wife will come tomorrow. Okay. I didn't say anything about, anything. I don't think I even heard the price. I came the next day, he says, I could swear to you, since yesterday, 3 other people came to see the house, and they offered $20,000, and one even offered more than that. But by me, this is Thomas Spinelli, a real Italian. By me, a word is a word. You came, I didn't ask any questions. I wouldn't hear anybody's offers. I know he's not lying, because people admitted to me that they offered more money. They said, you are lucky. We offered so much money, he wouldn't budge. Now, I didn't make a contract for sure. I didn't know what I was looking at. But it's something that you see that even without the Baruch Oyev Yashrus, that he doesn't know that, but this is what a Yid is supposed to live his life with. So the fact that you can make more money is not a factor. You have to make money, you have to be allowed to sell, but more money, Meniyas Revach, so worth more than Meniyas Revach, of course, is the Vasisa Yoshev HaToiv. Now, obviously, this is pashut that if there are 2 people competing for an apartment, so then there's no agreement at all, and avada the landlord could go with the higher, bid. There's nothing to talk about. B'chlal, when there are 2 bidders or more, that's very common, and again, something that you need a gadol to work this out, but it's a problem, because in our neighborhoods, I just heard my mom was not far from my house, a guy sold an old house, and he asked for a certain price. There were so many bidders that now the cost, it went up $300,000. The only gain is the guy used to sell it. This is common all over in the world, unfortunately. I do know of 2 kehilos that the way they worked it out is that there's a list of potential buyers. You go either to the Rav or the Rosh HaKol, and you don't go directly to the seller. And it's one at a time. So the price doesn't go up. Now, can this be worked out? So you need a gadol or a businessman. I'm none of the above. But this has to be worked out, because again, just around the corner of my house, $300,000 of Yiddish geld, I can say down the drain. I mean, that's just the way it works. But there's got to be a better solution. But le'idach gisa, when we work with Yashris, we know once we give a word has to be a word. If the seller is still advertising, then obviously he's not holding by closing with anybody, so then either you could offer a better bid, whatever it may be. A very challenging question, I'll tell you, a ma'aseh shahaya, but it's an insight into the whole sugya. This I saw in the Pischei Choshen, Geneva Periktes Arlan Beis. He quotes from a Tshuvas Halichas. I couldn't see it, I don't know what it is. I think I know what it is, but I couldn't get it. But this is the way he describes it. There was a landlord that already agreed to take a tenant, a mishpacha gedoyel with a lot of children. Somehow, a chassan and kala, engaged to be married, saw the apartment, they didn't know, and they looked and said, okay, we'll pay the price. And now the landlord was in a dilemma. To take a big family, it's very nice to have a kindergarten, but not on top of your head, making noise. On top of your head, you're going to have a big family, or chassan and kala. Chassan and kala, they're not yet married, 2 months to get married. You know how it is, every Shabbos they go away. It's almost a vacant apartment. So it's mamash a metzia gedola. But he already gave his word. They already agreed. There was an oral commitment with the tenant. There was a big family. So again, this halichos, I think it's Yisrael Grossman from Eretz Yisrael. But this Yisrael, halichos Yisrael, he said that it would be mutter to go with the chassan kal, with the second tenant. Why? So he says, because the landlord, you have to worry about his interest. Right now, he has 2 different situations. One is a dream situation, and one is challenging. That he says that the mahapach does not exist when the mask stands to lose. And he said, I told the Chazon Ish this, and he said, it sounds mistavra, but you have to look in Shuvas what they say. So I guess he was close enough to say, Lama likra svari, what do you do from Perish Shirayah? So Chazon Ish says, if the Pais can say differently, then that must be Hayoshev HaToiv, and don't do it. Now, I think I know what the Chazon Ish was skeptical about. Because Enochanami, had the landlord heard about this chassan and kala before he gave a formal agreement, then you can take what you want. But once he agreed, and worse yet, another tenant was the one that reached out. It wasn't the landlord reaching out, it was another tenant. So the tenant was in a violation of permissible. And the landlord may be b'shaik, meiz b'shaik, whatever the point is, but the landlord that accepted was oiv lefnei iva. So this again, the Pischei Choshen quotes that this Halichas Yisrael quote of Maram Alshich, that it says in the case where the moicha reached out to a different lekeach, it's fine. But again, it's not a right to our case that here the other tenant was the one that stepped in, shaloi kalacha. And Takat the Pischei Choshen, so he doesn't understand. But besides everything, he says, what's the heta for the landlord? What about the fact that he's mechusar amana? He promised to take the first family, so even if it's much better. So then he said, we'll soon see, there's a concept of trei, tar, we'll soon see what that means. But l'chayra, it's hard to understand because enochanami, the landlord has the option, Kozmani didn't make a commitment. But what's the heta if the second tenant did something wrong? Now maybe they did something wrong b'shaygik, probably, they didn't know. But that doesn't justify this situation. Another case, I want to mention a little bit about if the landlord made a precondition, I'm showing it to you, but if I get a better offer, I might go elsewhere. So that my bit already says, that's just an Aikayil Ma'isa, and there's no problem. Now typically a landlord is not limited, it doesn't have usually Animapach Charara, but that's not true. It could be very pashut. Let's say there's a tenant, a Chassan Kala, that's looking at a certain apartment. And a landlord number two wants that chassan kala. He wants that dream tenant. So once they saw the first one, so you have the same mahbecharara. In other words, typically it's two tenants competing for an apartment, but it could also be two landlords competing for a dream tenant. Now, but basically in a regular situation, the landlord, as long as he didn't give a commitment, he could go elsewhere. He's not bound by anamabcharara. In other words, it's shaykh that the tenant is oiva on a because they're close, but for the landlord, until there's an agreement, there wouldn't be a problem. Now, lamaisa, this is important to mention. Another ha'ora I saw. Let's say lamaisa, I'll give you a mashal. Let's say there's a small city and there's nothing going on. I mean, the opposite of our cities. There's barely a rental. But one landlord has an apartment and it's sitting empty and he can't be soivel. He invests big money and he advertises it all over. No. So tomorrow he's expecting a flood of tenants, which he has. But there's another landlord, a cheapskate, that stands a few feet away from this fella's house, and big sign, apartment for rent, whatever he does, I'll give you $50 less a month. Now, that's not sitkas, that's for sure. But is anything wrong? They didn't go into the other person's apartment yet. There's no hapacharor, they're not even near the other apartment. What's wrong? So this is terribly wrong. This is not only not sitkis, not only rish, could be a chayshemish, but an enforceable by Bezdin. Because this is the end of our tais that we began with. Rabbeinu Tam that argues on Rashi that by Mitzia it's mutter, he then asks a kasha on himself. How could I say Mitzia is mutter? There's a Gemara in Bava Basra, if a fisherman comes, puts out his nets and puts out bait, you can't come along, a second fisherman, and put your nets down. Why not? Presumably fish are hefka or mitzia or both. And like me, according to Rashi, is good, but like me, what about the heta of mitzia? So in those uncertain terms, wait a minute. If he invested money and that attracted the fish because he put down the right bait, so you're going to make a living on his investment, that's yored lomas chaverei. And Tais used a very clear lashon, ki ilu gazaloi. You are stealing his investment. He spent money attracting these fish, and you're stealing it. Hava ki ilu gazaloi. I can't think of a better mashal than the mashal that I made up. This first landlord puts up signs and advertises, and you come along, Shenid, and grab his customers. Now, a contemporary mashal that could be and was a share for itself is the copyright. A person makes a sefer, made a song, whatever it is. He made an investment. He made an invention. So I bought it from him. So why can I make more copies? Now it's mine. No. This is using someone else's investment of time, money, or both. So really the copyright law and all its expressions is based on this Rabbeinu Tam, that even though it's not a physical yitzira, a song, a story, an invention, but it's his kaiches. Remember when I was growing up, there was Baruch Hashem, was a wonderful idea. They sold and bought Gedolim pictures, if you remember. So on the back of the pictures it was stamped that Issa Sagas Gevul Yadua. I don't know what that meant, but I know one thing, you're not allowed to copy it. Why? This thing. This fella took a picture of a gadol. It's his creation now. I could buy it from him, but I don't own it enough to copy it. So that's the Rabbeinu Tam that I would be remiss in not mentioning. When someone invests, it's worse than just an ethical issue of Russia or whatever. Now, question. Both agreed, both signed a lease, even gave security. Now, right before the tenant moves in, he wants to go elsewhere. He found a much better deal. The question is, what's the halacha? So avada, in a case like that, the tenant is violating Mahosar in a very serious way. You don't just drop a commitment. Maybe if there was a kinyan that didn't work, it's a mishapar, which of course is frightening. We shouldn't go further than that. But let's say he decides, okay, I'll brave those two, which is of course insanity, but let's say he does. So the emes is, I'm not sure, I mean, a lease might not be a kinyan. You have to know again how it's structured. So maybe it's not a mishapara, but at least a mechusar amana. So here the question is there any financial compensation? A day before the March 1st, what's he going to do with it? So if the apartments are mamish go quickly and he could find an apartment before March 1st, so you're stuck maybe with mishapara, mechusar amana, but at least there's no financial chiyuv to pay. I mean, to me, it's worse to be a Russia than having to pay. But anyhow, it's not the point. He's not asking that. But Lamaisa, the question is, if let's say the month of March, it sits vacant. So you caused him to lose a month of rent. That's a lot of money. Or maybe he'll say, Adrabah, I caused him, so it's a grama. Grama Nazakin is pata. Now, grama Nazakin is pata, that's half the story. The Chayiv Lot says, Yidei Shemayim. And I always say, I'd rather be Chayiv B'dei Odom than B'dei Shemayim on the Barishem's blacklist. I don't need that. So, people have to have the right priorities. Let's say Shemayim is worse than B'dei Odom. But anyhow, Lamaisa, he says, okay, he's willing to brave the Mahosar Amana, he'll do this as well. But it's not true. Because we find regarding canceling a worker, a caterer, a hall, whatever it is, that you can't just cancel the last minute and say, well, you didn't have a job tonight. Okay, I'm sorry, I caused you, I'm sorry. There's a chiyuv to pay a worker if he can't find a different job because you hired him. The Rishonim at great length, that's a share for itself, explain why isn't it grama. So either it's not grama, it's garmi, and garmi is chayiv. I'm not going to get into the details. Or else it's a beshel takanas chazal. If you make an agreement to take a worker, etc., you can't just cancel, and you have to pay. Or some say it's a shibud that you made. And this, of course, was extremely negeya throughout our history. People, you can't just cancel on a worker, call him up and cancel. But lamaisa, to make a long story short, this l'chayra applies to a rental as well. That's what the Paiskim say. If lamaisa, he can't find someone to take care of the apartment, and he's going to be left an empty apartment, some compare rental apartments to schiras payalim. Others feel it's not a good comparison. I can't go through the details, but I could say definitely it's a tzad chomor that he has to pay until the landlord finds a different tenant. Now, there is another factor here. Let's say, chas v'shalom, there was an emergency. The tenant had to go to Eretz Yisrael, his father had a stroke, he has to be there indefinitely. And he can't live in America in Eretz Yisrael. So by an oynis, there's those that are makel. Just like during COVID, there were thousands of cancellations, and no one had to pay. Because an oin is gamor, then a person cancels, what could he do? Both are oinsim, but oinis is different. What's interesting is, let's say the tenant, the last day found an apartment at a vilda metzia. I'm talking about, a chatzichina, like they say. So this is what the Rishonim discussed called trei tari. He paid a regular price, but here he has someone gave him an offer, much better conditions and a much better price. So the Mechaber doesn't even mention that. What do you mean? So who cares? You can't just renege on a contract. Yeah, no, you can't just, not me. There are more quotes 2 days in Siman Reish Dalet. So it's a suffix if there's a het trei tari. So to put it very simply, if a person drops a contract of a rental, it's very, very yitach and he has to pay. If he could prove it's an oynis and trei tari, and even those are not so pashut. Basically, my point is, we can't go through this as a big sugya, but we have to understand that what has to be clear, both tenants and landlords have rights. It's just, I asked once in yeshiva, says, who owns the apartment? The landlord or the tenant? So the Bonbach said, very good, depends who you ask. And he's right. The landlord said, I put my life to this house, I own it. And tenant said, well, I'm paying rent, I'm not a tzedakah case. And the emes is the tenant has rights. I want to tell you something. Let's say the landlord has a house, and this rental is his investment. Rahman had his house burned down, and now he's homeless. So he tells the landlord, matter of fact, by the way, I'm homeless, but you're homeless now because you're out, I got to move in. So this is a Mechab and Shinyud Beis Sif Aleph. Within the lease, you don't kick anybody out. You're homeless, that's it, you can't kick him out. Because Chiras is Kememka. If the landlord wants to make renovations and the tenant says, I don't want, so you can't force him, it's his house. But then again, it's the landlord's house. Now, this is why there's so many problems, because each see from their perspective. But basically, each has to protect the other person's rights. And when it comes to a sort of an issue, we have to realize the Asisi Yoshev Toiv is the best investment we can make. There's a Mavel Dika Magid Mishnah in Hilchos Shchenim, Yudalid, Halacha Hey. He says, mamish, exquisite words. Just like there's a Kedoshim Tiyu in Ruchnius, and we all strive, B'mutalach, the Kedoshim Tiyu in Mominis is Vayoshev HaToiv. That's Kedush. We feel the Sipuk if we fast Yom Kippur, and we fast an extra hour or two. And how about if we give in, and we're more mavater on a few dollars? That's the Kedoshim Tiyu in Ruchnius. In Gashmius, I know the right word. But no doubt about it, this is clear that when you can't just cancel. Now, the emes vakeret, if the landlord wants to renege on his contract and the tenant nebuch is homeless and he has to take a furnished apartment, it costs much more, then some say that the landlord would have to pay the difference. But it's only going to work if there's an agreement, there's a mutual understanding that each one has to respect the other one. Another mashal. We hear stories, people are late paying the rent. It's an avla. Besides, the Chavetz Chaim says in Avos Chesed Tes Sif Hey that there could be a deraisa Bal Tolin, but this is his panasa. We shouldn't be late. In fact, if a landlord wants to charge a late fee penalty, and as long as it's done right, that it's not ribbis, it's not per day, but it's one-time penalty, so he's allowed to. It's part of the contract. In fact, if he's delinquent in his payment, could be he's allowed to evict him. But the point is, each of one has to think of the other one. And I should mention, has to be mentioned, people take tenants that are either goyim or inshitulay maili that could ruin the sviva, ruin the hashpa, ruin the neighborhood. That's not just the yashrus, that's a hilchos shchenim. But let me leave you on a more positive note with two beautiful shilas, and tein l'chachem v'yech kamoid. As you know, in the yeshiva there's a chavrusa tumul, which means you go out and you try to find the chavrusa. Question, let's say I spot someone in the back and I would love to learn him. But right now he's handling with someone else. Can I motion to him, call him over, and offer him, or whatever I'll offer him, I want to take his chavrusa. Does it apply on a map of charara to chavrusas? I saw Michal Yudah Lefkowitz in the Darchei Chaim, Chelik Aleph, Amit Shinchav. He was asked this shaila, and he basically says a person has to make sure he gets the best chavrusa. Now, it doesn't say it clearly, but it means to say in Ruchnius, you have to get the best for yourself, but make sure the other person is satisfied. Now, it seems he holds that we're applying Chayecha Koidmin in this situation. Now, we spoke about this a few weeks ago. The Chsam Seifa, Al Torah and Parsh Kedoshim, on the passage after Yacha Kamoicha, Zekla Godel B'Torah, says when it comes to Torah, there's no Chayecha Koidmin. Rav Moshe in Ebenezer, Chelik Dalet in Ebenezer, Simon Chavav, argues vehemently on this. He says, Torah Shein Ein Mo this Chayecha Koidmin. So it's probable that Michal Yehuda was going with Rav Moshe's sad that Chayecha Koidman applies to Ruchniach, and that Yashris for yourself overrides Onim HaPecharara. Or maybe we could say that this would, like Rashi, like the Ramah, it's only HaPecharara if they made a agreement. Kolzman, there's no agreement, even though the Prisha argues, but we could be Saimech on Rashi. Plus, like you said, maybe a Chavrus like this is a Metzia and is Mutter going to Beinu Tam. But last but not least, and this bothered me because it's a true story officially, he was lining up to back into a spot. He put on his blinkers, and someone came along and chapped the spot. But how he chapped the spot was an ultimate chutzpah. He sent his child to run into the area and block this person from backing into the spot. So this Yid told me, this is the first in my life I had a Yetzirah to run over a human being. He's a Choshev Yid. He says, oh, such a chutzpah. I mean, I'm looking at the chinuch, limdu l'shoinem, last says avos. But anyhow, but the question was besides the terrible chinuch, is that a mahapech b'charara? So the emes is, you might say, oh, this is a metzia, and talking about an hour neighbor is a metzia, but that's exaggerating. It's taka not easy, but it's not a metzia. And the only thing is, what was he doing? Was he kind of the ground? Did he buy rights? No, but that's mahapech. He's backing up, he puts the blinker on, but the ik is that we have to mahad in kadashim tiyu by siyah shvatayv guten tag to you.
1 minute. B'shem B'gin Shir Torah, I'd like to thank Rabbi Smith for the shir, but the sequence will be shortly. Rabbi, so wait 1 minute, please, Vat. Everybody knows that there's a war in Israel, but at the same time there's a war in Ukraine. And thousands of Yiddish kinder walk up the heart, they want to learn more Torah, go do mitzvahs, chasen a tayit, put on tefillin. One of the front runners of Moses Akdoshim to bring out Torah in Klal Yisrael in Ukraine is my Rebbe Zogzunzan, the Heilige Stoner Rebbe, who over 30 years ago saw his vision and created over thousands of Yiddish kinderlach homes, tens of thousands of Yidden born by Kedusha. They want to come out to learn, they want to put on tefillin, they want to eat kosher, they want to keep Shabbos, a kosher kitchen, chasana, diras. Millions of dollars needs to be every single day to help out the Avodas HaKodesh. And in a quiet way, the Stoner Rebbe Zangzund and the Manalos, Rav Agon, Rav Shmuel Dishon, Rav Yankel Steinman, Rav Moshe Fime in Europe, everybody's trying to do the best they can for Yiddish Kinderach. Today there's a matching fund going on to charity. They're raising today 1.5, matching whatever you give. It's a tremendous chus. We need chus in Klal Yisrael and the Eis Sorah. What biggest chus could you have by helping the Eibishter's kinder for the Eibishter? You're going to rat of Hashem's kids in this chus. We ask them to give bigger money, whatever you can, 100, 1,000, whatever you can. It's a tremendous chus. And this chus, or the Eibishter, and everybody should have good kinder. You should all have protection and Hashemayim. Or we need Shemirim and Hashemayim for you and for the kinderlech, that you should have good to heilige deiris. Your kids shouldn't have to come to this nisyonis that they made through. And this was an alle government with bonne chaim, with zon revich and atzloch and v'chol tov. Abchem lekashem rot kosh baruch zakasol fikir hebron mit mit shnem badem kofas man tzidkei yagdil teure v'yade. There's a table on the outside in the hallway. Please check the Yisrael or credit card. Kaddish.
So everyone could come and chap to hear the sikkim.
What we learned today is that we have to learn Choshen Mishpat, obviously. A word is a word. Like me by if there's a kinyan, like me by if there was an agreement, a written agreement, but even a verbal agreement, minimally is the chomer of Mechusar Amana. Mishapara was when there was a kinyan that really wasn't chal entirely. But even Medayva Emes Bilvava, even Machshava, we have to honor certainly to keep a word. And that's the basis of Ani Mahapech B'Charar and Nikra Rasha. Even though there was no kinyan, there was no agreement, but the fact that he was there first, we have to give him, each person has to get has their rights. If he's interested, let him chop it. If not, you could take it. But it has to be either there was an agreement, a verbal, albeit a verbal, or according to the priest, and that's the halacha, that's the minig, even close to it, you have to let someone see if he wants to take it. A one-sided agreement, and certainly when both sides are not happy, then you can move in and try to make it work. But basically, when there's an agreement, even if it's not yet finalized, that's ani mahapech charora. If by the landlord, there is no is mahapech charora, but if he takes the offer of the second tenant, the second tenant's oiva on mahapech charora, and the landlord's oiva on lifnei iva. Lav dafka buying is there on mahapech who had in a rental. We did see a yisaitic machlokes Rashi and Beinutam regarding if by hefko or metzia there is mahapech becharora. A shortage of apartments l'chayra is not enough typically to make it a metzia. So even according to Rabbeinu Tam, it should be a problem. A lease expiring, so then the one that's there has the right to renew. If he doesn't want, then you could take it. And a chanami, the landlord could change his mind if there was an agreement. So there's no mahapech charora in that case. But once there was a verbal agreement, then the landlord is bound by the מחוסר אמנה. We had an interesting story where a chassan and kalas saw it after he agreed to a big family, and the chayra, even though it was an avla b'shaygig, but it was an avla, and they should really not take it when the big family had it first. The landlord has a taina, that might be, if it's enough of a difference, that might be treitari perhaps, but this is the question of מחוסר אמנה, but no longer are we worrying about a mahapech charora because it was done by avla. A landlord has to be careful taking someone else's tenant, a desirable tenant, that's mahapech charora. Using someone else's investment of time or money is a gezela, that's a copyright law, that's a sugya of taking someone else's work and using it. A tenant that wants to drop his lease, it possibly has to pay the landlord's loss. It's more than a grama, the question is when it's lamaisa, but there's definitely a havamina, and therefore ask a shayla first. A real oinus, or a real treitari, that there are some that are makel, even that is not certain. But both have rights, tenant and landlord have rights, each has to protect the other one. We said a chavrusa, there's probably no mahapech charora by a parking spot, there probably is, but the ik is the feeling of kedoshim to you in these inyanim.
Thank you very much. Good. How you doing?